Now, of course, it's on to the guest of honour, Jason Masters. So Jason is a chair and non-executive director with over 20 years of experience gained through serving on the boards of more than 20 different organisations, both business and government and not-for-profit. I would run through for about 2 minutes all the different boards and committees that he's on at the moment, but that's probably not what people are here to hear. It did make me wonder, however, how on earth he found the time to write this book. Above all, getting to know Jason through his advocacy, including around the defeated religious discrimination bill, here's what I would refer to as good people. Jason, first of all, congratulations on writing the book.
Thank you.
And doing the probably even scarier thing of letting it loose in the world. Let's start off with the obvious. What prompted you to write the book?
So, a bit like Anthony, I had come out, I'd started to go to an organisation that Anthony had actually started called Freedom to Be, which was a group of Christian LGBTIQ plus. I'm going to use the word queer because my tongue gets tied. I give you myself permission. There are still people in our vintage who struggle with that word, but I'm okay with it. So, group of queer people of faith meeting in the Akon Health Centre, and then we'd go out for dinner afterwards. And we got to know each other's stories. And then a couple of people said, within a year, you have to write your story. And I thought that was a bit stupid. Why would anybody be interested in my story? And it just kept happening. And then in a year or so later, I went to Hong Kong. I was asked to be on a panel at the Asia Pacific Rainbow Families Forum in Hong Kong. And I actually thought it'd be good to try talking about part of my story outside the country where most people would hear it. And interestingly enough, it was co-sponsored by one of the international schools that actually had a lot of queer kids at the school. And their teacher was there, who had recently published her memoir, which was full twice or something or other, where she had been, she wanted to find a male lover and got caught up with these internet frauds twice. And as she heard a little bit about my story on the panel, she said, I mentioned I was thinking about writing it and I'll just put it in a PDF on a website somewhere. She said, no, you've got to talk to Pashmina and we've got to get this story down. So that's when it became a serious activity.
For people writing this kind of book, some people might find it cathartic, some people might find it traumatic. How did you find the process?
So for me, I had a time management problem, and I think what I've learned out of the process and what I would do mentoring people doing this is make sure you write something every day. And that was the problem I had, was actually getting it going. The other problem I had is I thought I just had to kind of write linearly, and I was still very much also in my business executive head as I was writing. And so my mentor, Pashmina, she said, look, just write anything. If you get up today and you feel like you're writing something that might be closer to where you are now, just write that. If tomorrow you get up and you want to write something about when you're at school, write that. The next day, if you want to write something about your kids, write that. Just write, and then we'll sort it out later. And there are a whole lot of different models around how a memoir can go. Mine's turned out to be relatively linear, but the first chapter is out of sequence. It's kind of the draw-in chapter, so to speak. So most of it I was doing very well. But Anthony and I had another dinner, and it was the mental health check-in that Anthony did, and just wanted to see how it was going, because he had mentioned in his other talks and in that dinner about how it can be cathartic, but it also can be traumatic writing elements of your story. And so, funny enough, I went soon afterwards and I was seeing my psychologist. I was seeing him monthly at that stage, and he knows of Anthony. And I said, I had this lovely dinner with Anthony, and he said, just wanted to make sure you're going mentally well. And obviously I'd been talking to my psychologist a lot about this process. And he can be a real bastard sometimes. Because after I told him about the conversation, his next question is, what periods of your life are you avoiding writing? And that became really interesting. And so we then talked about what I needed to put in place to actually do that. And one of it was talking to Joshua and Kate about, right, I'm now going to be heading into the place I now realise, I didn't realise it, but I now realise I'm avoiding. My psychologist wants, if you're okay with this, to make sure I'm having a shower each day, that I'm eating every day, because these are all the things that could happen if I'm not managing myself through the process. We got through that fairly well, it wasn't too much of a problem. The major trauma I had was one of the things about writing a book, particularly a memoir, is you have to get approval from everybody and every organisation who is named or is identifiable. So even if you don't name them, if through the narrative, a lot of people could identify that person, you're actually going to go and get their approval. And so the opening chapter is post Parliament passing the marriage equality laws. And for my first time in my life, I had become a member of the Uniting Churches Assembly. So we have like 3 or 4 different tiers of government. And the way I describe Assembly is the Parliament of the church at a national level. And so I hadn't actually made the first cut. 2 weeks before the Assembly was due to start, I got a phone call from the synod here saying, somebody can't go, you're the next off the cab, can you go? So in a sense, it was actually quite good not having a lot of notice to go. I fortunately had a meeting with my psychologist and we planned some things, how to cope through that. So we went through that, and one of the things is there was a suicidal incident at the Assembly with me, with things that had happened there. So anyway, one of the organisations I had to get approval from was the Uniting Church, and at lots of different parts of the book. And when we were discussing the church's decision to approve or not approve people getting, 2 people getting married in the Uniting Church, 7 days we were discussing this. It was very hard. I wrote about something that happened that triggered the event of me storming out of the Assembly and heading to Box Hill Road to step in front of a truck or a bus. And they said, you can't say what happened in that meeting. And but I said, on the Eternity website where it talked about the meeting, somebody who wasn't at the meeting had already published some comments about me that were false. So somebody who was at the meeting then wrote comments saying, that was wrong, this is actually what happened. And I said, it's already out there. Surely I can at least reference those comments. No, you can't. So I actually had to rewrite kind of the seminal introductory chapter of the book with this very huge event without actually saying what the trigger was. And that was really the most traumatic part of the writing. It took me 3 months to be able to get in a position to redraft that, and it took me about 3 months to redraft that chapter.
Okay. So you've actually headed into the territory I was going to ask about next, and that's a central part of your character and therefore a central part of the book is that you're a person of faith. Now, obviously, your relationship with faith was different while you were in the closet and perhaps fearful of what your religion might say about you and to you, and then having to renegotiate that after you came out of the closet and finding a way to re-engage, although it doesn't sound like it was 100% changed. How would you contrast those 2 different types of engagement with your faith?
So I think before coming out, so I went to a Uniting Church school in Adelaide. I'd sort of moved away from regular church attendance towards the end of my high school and at university. And then when I moved to Melbourne, the only thing that was familiar was a church around the corner, Uniting Church. So I went there, and a week or so later, the minister turned up, and we got on very well. And the next week, he said, "So you're going to be teaching Sunday school from next week?" I was like, no, I haven't been in church for sort of 4 years, so no. And he said, no, we've got nobody, your background's fine, just get on and do it. And actually, I don't know if he knew this or whether he was just so desperate for somebody to teach Sunday school, which is probably the truth. It was actually a good process to recenter my faith, rediscover my faith and find it my own. And Melbourne is very much the epicentre of social justice in the Uniting Church. And so I did a lot of training in social justice with the youth ministry unit and things like that. So I had a very strong social justice. And as a couple of people have said, I was doing lots of things, and I think I was doing lots of things because that was a way of me avoiding part of who I am. When I came out, I was very concerned. I sit on the board of Uniting Financial Services, which is the bank, for the want of a better word, of the Uniting Church here in New South Wales. And to give you an idea of the size of it, if you think of the top 10 mutual banks in Australia, we're about in the mid-tier. That's kind of, so not an insubstantial organisation. And I went to my pastoral carer and said, look, I think I've just got to tell everybody. I feel like I've been a fraud. I'm on all these boards or audit and risk committees. I've been a fraud not saying who I am. And the reply I got from her, Miriam, and also my psychologist was, why? Why do you have to tell anybody? When you were interviewed for those roles, did they ask you if you were married? No. Did they ask you if you were gay? No. Did they ask you if you're heterosexual? No. So why do you feel? And it was a really interesting question. And so that gave me an insight into what many people in the queer community have as shame. And that's what I was dealing with. And so from there on, I started doing what these two people told me to do. If you want to tell somebody, think about why you want to tell somebody, how you're going to tell them. And the hardest part for me was what was important for me in sharing that. And actually thinking about me is something I've never been very good at. And so that was a really interesting thing. And then I've probably done a lot more Bible study than a lot of Christians because I had to work out how I fitted as a gay Christian in my church and myself.
Okay. So we've stumbled across the topic of disclosure. So we'll get to the telling your wife. Mm-hmm. Essentially. Can you tell us what it was like to do that in what was a mixed gender, outwardly heterosexual relationship? I think in the past we might have said a gay and married man relationship, but thankfully post-marriage equality, that means something different now. Yep. But what was that experience like for you?
So I suppose a little bit of context is both my ex-wife and I had always said if either of us need to see a therapist for whatever, we just go do it, and we don't need to explain to the other person why. But we would tell the other party we were going, just so that if we came home kind of a bit upset, we kind of knew why, and wide berth and give them space. So that'd been a process both of us had been doing, and in fact, leading up to coming out, both of us were. Well, I was certainly doing it, and my ex-wife was talking about the need to start that process again for herself. So that's the context. One of the things that happened was I had been seeing a therapist for quite a while and I wasn't getting anywhere, so I stopped and my mental health deteriorated. So she asked me to go back and see the therapist. I said, no, I've stopped. So I went to my GP, found another one. And if anybody knows any doctors in the room, share the part about the first person I told was my GP, so I'm not going to go into that story now, but this is how all GPs should operate. And interestingly enough, he's a very conservative Christian. So I actually want, the AMA and the Royal Society of GPs to actually read that. But so we're going on, I was getting better, but Jill was thinking I was not getting well quick enough, and she was concerned that my psychologist wasn't the right one for me. And I kept saying, Yes, no, we're doing well. It's just I'm working through a lot of crap. And she knew that I was working through a whole lot. I grew up in domestic violence at home, mainly emotional abuse. So there was 4 or 5 years of unpacking that in my 30s. So when I was talking to Michael, as he's known in the book, that's not his name, my therapist, he said, I think we need to prepare you for coming out early. And so we did a couple of sessions about what questions might be asked, what might trigger the coming out. And basically I saw him a fortnight later, came home, was in my bedroom, and she came in and said, what's going on? I'm not happy with your therapist. I'm not happy that your mental health is actually improving. And I said, really, everything's okay. Things are going well with the therapist. I know where I'm going, but I really don't want to deal with it until after Joshua had finished his HSC. And so we batted backwards and forwards. And then eventually she said, so you've got a terminal illness, have you? That was what she thought was the reason why I didn't want to say to her then, and I didn't want to say anything to the family. And that put me in a very, very awkward position, because I didn't want her to have to spend another 3 or so months thinking that. So then she said, are you leaving me? And so that's when I came out. The reaction was really quite interesting. There was no yelling and screaming, which was great. She did say, I often wondered if you were bi. So that was interesting. So that night went very well, and kind of that week went okay, but the months after that were some challenges we had to work through.
And I think you briefly wanted to mention support service that...
Oh, yes. One of the things that was very helpful for Jill was the fact that I was able to tell her I never had a relationship with anybody apart from herself, so I never cheated on her, and that was helpful for her. And I've been doing a lot of research and found that there's a women's shelter in Leichhardt that was actually set up in the HIV crisis. In fact, one of the former co-conveners of Uniting Network, the queer network in the Uniting Church, used to work at St Vincent's in the HIV ward as a volunteer, and they got to realise his pastoral skills. And so when a person came into the ward who was HIV positive and was married, he got the job of going and telling the wife. And so that was one of the reasons why this centre was set up, to help the women who were married to gay or bi men who had HIV. Fortunately, the funding for that has continued. It is still in regular use for people in our situation. And sadly, it's the only funded centre of its kind in Australia. And so on that night, to be able to say, I'll go downstairs, I'll get you a number, call these people tomorrow, and they provided her crisis support for about 6 weeks, and then she had to go into traditional counselling. But that immediate support by people who had been down this path for 30 years was very important.
Many people often talk about a weight being lifted off their shoulders when they come out. That wasn't necessarily your experience. In fact, reading the book, many of your darkest days were after that. Tell us more about that.
So part of it was sort of the complexity of home. One of the things my ex-wife had a preference for was for us to cohabit for 2 years until my daughter had finished HSC. Now, interestingly enough, I hope I don't embarrass Kate around the corner, telling the kids each of them was very different. And both of us had been talking to our therapists about it, and it was basically expect anything and just roll with it and be supportive and caring. We can give you ideas about what might happen, but invariably there'll be something else that will happen. Joshua, he was exhausted after his HSC, didn't say anything. Kate is a semi-elite sports person. You know, she was in the New South Wales team that won the netball championship for schools, the under-15s. She, in her first year of trying to play volleyball, you know, just trying to learn for a bit of fun, she made the under-17 state reserve team and played in the nationals. You know, a naturally gifted athlete. The only time I have really seen Kate cry was, we think she broke her arm in about the third of 22 games of netball over 3 days at the state age championships. She, on the last day when it was obviously clear that the team wasn't going to make the first or second, she had a bad fall, and if it wasn't fully broken in that first game, it was fully broken by that end of the game. So she plays sport with broken arms and, you know, all that sort of stuff. When Jill mentioned that there was this possibility we were going to cohabitate, Kate started to cry, and that was the confusing part. You know, Kate doesn't cry. And what she then said, which shows her empathy, you know, way beyond, you know, she's 15 years old at this stage, said, what I want is for the two of you to be happy, whatever that looks like. So she didn't want to have the pressure of us cohabitating for her. So that was really interesting. And I've forgotten where I'm going, which is my memory problem at the moment. Where was I going with all of this?
I think we're going to the next question.
Oh, good. Excellent.
So you as well as coming out later in life, you also came out at a time where our community's relationships were the subject of intense public debate. So the debate about the plebiscite, then the postal survey. What was it like coming out in that environment? And I guess from my perspective, why did you choose to throw yourself into advocacy around those things?
I think, as Joshua said, I have a skill set that I could use. I think I also had a lot of guilt. People like yourself and Anthony and I've forgotten, you had dinner with him the other day, the two guys who started camp. Peter. You know, they did the hard work in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. I didn't. I was in the progressive side of the church, so I was always advocating where I could, but it was a marginal sort of issue for me. So I think I was dealing with a lot of guilt that these people had done the hard work that in a sense I was benefiting from. So I think that was the first trigger. And I actually had a number of people express concern that I was doing too much too early. And I think no doubt there wasn't. And if I was to mentor anybody who was in my situation, I would at least cut down half of what I was doing. I think the plebiscite we all had to do, I think I was one of two campaigners in Bennelong, which we went down just. And that was tough when people from my own denomination, a Korean parish in Strathfield, were coming along Bland Cove Road near my home and putting up signs, "Think of the children." And you know, here I was with my kids. People were very concerned that I was door knocking on myself. You know, you should always door knock with pairs. I was doing it by myself. So that was all stupid stuff I was doing. As I got over that and we got through that, I started to become a little bit more strategic. I still think I am probably doing too much and a bit all over the place. But then the religious discrimination bills and I think it was Mark Latham's bill in New South Wales that really brought me in. He wanted to we put a draft legislation in called the Parental Rights Bill. And essentially what that was to ban any staff in schools from supporting transgender or gender diverse kids. So it meant if you were a front office staff person who provided any support to a trans kid, you could be sacked. If you're a teacher, you could be sacked and have your licence taken away. That was a horrible bill. So I spent quite a lot of work researching a paper for Uniting Network. And through that, and again, theological reviews, I saw a lot of rubbish that was being presented by people who were supporting these bills. And it's kind of sad when we got into the religious discrimination bills, the same characters at all these meetings. And I actually wrote to the Attorney General last week because he's meeting with these same very conservative people and has not yet with the Uniting Church, nor any of the communities of faith in the queer community. So that's where I'm kind of seeing my advocacy now. And now I've got enough data that it won't take me 4 weeks to write a paper. I can do a lot of cutting and pasting now, which is helpful.
In our chats ahead of this launch, you've mentioned that it took you a while to understand that coming out was not a one-off process, but that it's an ongoing process. How do you approach disclosure these days? What does it mean to be visible? How do you do visibility? Other than writing a 300-page book.
I think I was very nervous because, again, I was coming out into a very divisive period of time with the postal survey. And so I was lucky enough to get a spot at Stanford University for one of their executive leadership programs, specially designed for LGBTIQ people. And it was only the third one they'd run, so it was lovely. There were about 50 of us from all around the world, about a third from outside America. And I had bought a sort of a Pride watch band, and at that point in time I had two watch bands, the very obvious one and the one that was far less obvious, and if you knew, you knew, and nobody else kind of knew. So when I went to Stanford, I thought, if I can't wear this all the time at that course, then I'm not being who I am. So I did, and actually one of the people who runs an LGBTIQ plus resource centre up in Sacramento made a comment to me, you're just wearing that watch band all the time. If you can do it, hearing your story, I can too. So, somebody who I thought was much more ahead of me in their journey than I was, I found that phenomenal. So when I came back from that, I thought I've got to change. And so I tended to hide things that I was doing on the weekends. I might just catch up with friends, or I might do this. And then I was appointed the CEO of Southern Metropolitan Cemeteries. And I thought, this is a fresh start. So I had been the administrator of Rookwood, and I was actually going through my transition there. And George, where are you, George? George Simpson was my CEO. And so he saw a lot of that journey, and he saw some of the good days and the bad days, and was a wonderful, he was supporting his boss, which is kind of a weird situation to be in, but very, very gracious in doing that. So starting this new role, I thought, this is a clean sheet, I'm actually going to start. And so literally I started, I had to go overseas for a book writing retreat. I came back, and we're heading to Mardi Gras, and somebody said, what are you doing this weekend? And I said, we're actually starting to prepare the drumming for our Mardi Gras floats and things like that. And it was, I didn't, oh, so you're an ally, are you? Oh, no, I'm gay, I came out late in life. Oh, really? I didn't realise that. And then the next day she said, you know what? I was thinking about what she said. If only we had somebody like you here 6 months ago, a Greek Orthodox dentist who was 31 committed suicide, who was gay. The church, his church that he'd been in all his life, refused to bury him. His parents wouldn't really tell parts of his story when he was buried. It would have been so much helpful to have you here. You could have done, I don't know what you would have done, but you would have done something to make it better for his friends at least, and possibly also for his family, since you're also a Christian. Might have caused some tensions, but I'm sure he would have found a way. And then later on, we were having a problem over at Matraville. There was a lesbian couple. They bought a plot side to side, a joint tombstone, headstone. One of them died very much younger. Headstone's written up beautifully, her name, loving partner of her. I don't think they were married because marriage equality had only just come around. and other details. The dead woman's family would regularly come and scratch out the partner of the granite tombstone. And so we're talking 2020. Right? So again, I was still a baby in the community, but I was able to say, right, there are queer units, support units in New South Wales Police. As much as we still have some challenges with them from time to time, there are dedicated people. Let's go to the Matraville Police Station and ask to speak to that particular group and then see what help we can do. So I think me doing what everybody else does naturally, just talking about what you do on the weekend, opened up a huge amount of doors.
Yeah. We probably sadly only have time for two last very brief questions. We heard earlier tonight from Anthony Van Brown about his book from 2 decades ago, and in some ways your books are companion pieces. How do you feel about his book now, and what do you want your book to be thought of by others?
So I'm very thankful for Anthony's support. He's looking out for me on those occasions, and also both of us sort of trying to knock back the people who thought that I was going to attack Anthony's market. I think in one of those those dinners, Anthony said, "I don't want just your book, Jason. I want a row in a bookshop. Right? We've got to get these stories out, because it's only when we get these stories out will people know." So I've come out into a relatively good time, but I've heard you go, "Oh my goodness," for a couple of the little stories I've told, things that are still happening now. So Anthony was very much supportive. I think the other thing is, it's practically 20 years since Anthony put his book, first edition out, and this, as you say, is potentially a companion piece, means it is still an issue. And it's still an issue primarily around how the churches in Australia or religious organisations operate in Australia. And there is no reason for them to operate like they do. So I think that probably is the key message, that we have the man who bared his soul as the frontier, and then 20 years later, I'm basically saying a lot of it is still the same. Fortunately, I hope you don't mind me saying this, Anthony went through conversion therapy or practices, which are devastating. I didn't go through that, but I would say I actually went through a far more subtle version of it, which has its own damage. So that's what I hope, that we've still got a long way to go.
Yeah, and to end on a positive note, you end the book with a message that you use regularly as a basketball coach.
Yes.
What is it, and what do you want that to mean for others?
So I coached high school basketball at Chatswood, and the saying is about you, because in basketball you've got 5 kids or 5 players on each team, and often you see with a kid when they are, on the offensive action and they miss a goal or something happens, they kind of collapse. The opposition gets the ball, they rush down the other end, and your team is now one person down. So the saying I developed was, you can't change the past, but you can influence the future. And so I suppose that's where I'm at now, and that was one of the big battles I had with my therapist. Was I talk about I kept everything in a box. Deep inside me, why did the box lid come off? And his comment was, we could look at that, we could probably spend a year looking at that, and we probably won't get the answer. So I was doing a lot of what ifs. What if I had done this with this person? Or what if I'd done this when I was 30? Or what if I'd done this when I was 40? And I can't do that what if. I've got to, I've had a good life. It's had some bad elements, but I've had a good life. Now it's about what can I influence in the future, and both for myself, for my kids, for my church, for my business community, for my friends, and the broader society.
I think that's a great note to leave things on. First of all, I'd like to encourage everyone to give a big thank you and applause. was going to say to our three interviewees, to Hugh, to Joshua and to Anthony, but obviously also to congratulate Jason on the launch of his book. Copies of the book are available for purchase, and he'll be on hand to sign those as well. A reminder that if tonight's discussion has raised any issues for you, that you can contact Q Life daily, and that Rosalie is over in the corner to chat to in person. So I invite you to have a drink, have a chat, and again, congratulations, Jason.
Thank you very much.